Anyway, I guess we'll go ahead and start just with welcoming everybody. Thank you all for joining our May program. It's exciting time of year in our area for sure, because May brings all those migrants in that are going to nest here. So if you haven't been out birding, you should, because all the oak trees, all the fruited mulberry trees, they're attracting just tons of birds right now. And a lot of birds are actually sitting on their nests. So my yard's absolutely quiet. And I'm figuring a lot of birds are sitting on their eggs, and they're very quiet right now. But we should hear the chatter of young soon, if not already. So welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and start our program tonight with Carol Burr and Roger Lederer and the art of the bird. But we do generally like to start with some general topics of field trips and just some interesting, stories or subjects that are happening right now. But what I usually like to do is start out by asking people that we are in the market for a field trip coordinator. I think that's an exciting position with Altacal Audubon. We've had some great field trip coordinators, but they kind of come and go. So if you're interested in being our field trip coordinator, and that's something that we all love to do, is go on field trips, because that's where you actually learn and can help yourself with identifying birds, is going on field trips. So if you're interested in a field trip coordinator for Altacal Audubon, please let us know by contacting Mary, right, Mary? And we would love to hear if you're wanting to join our board as a field trip coordinator.
How do I get the?
I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay.
On the face and go to the top left,
And we're excited because wait until you see the June, July newsletter. It's going to come out at the beginning of June. There's incredible field trips that are going to be offered, and they just are going either camping, or there's going to be ones that are local up into the mountains. And Mary is leading quite a number of them. And you want to just comment on a couple of them that you're going to lead?
Last year, or the last couple of years, I've been going up to Bucks Lake right around July 4th. And I'm going to lead that for Wildflowers and Birds up by Bucks Lake. And I think that's January 26th. And then I'm leading one up to the high elevation of Butte County, up by Cold Springs and Humboldt Summit on July 10th, I think.
Oh, you mean June, the end of June, you're doing the ones up to Wildflowers, right? Okay, great. And also, we've all decided that sometimes we have these pop-up field trips where it's too late to get them into the newsletter. So I went ahead and organized a Black Butte field trip overnighter this coming Sunday, Monday night. So we're going to camp at Black Butte Lake, Orland Butte Campground. And we're going to be there May 23rd and 24th. So if you're interested in meeting us for the day or camping with us, contact me, please. And we'll see, there's plenty of campsites left. And it's a great time to be there before the heat comes in. And we just heard from Carla, Sunday's field trip. There was incredible birds and the lesser nighthawk. And so if you're interested, contact me if you want to camp overnight. Also, our last but not least field trip is coming up here the end of May. Well, actually this coming Sunday, May 23rd, is a kayak field trip on the Thermal After Day led by Carol Anderson and myself. So you have to bring your own kayak or canoe. We'll meet at Larkin Cove and we'll get out onto the water. And this should be a really good time to see the western and Clark's breed on the lake, and this is when they should be pairing up. So maybe we'll see them actually do some of their mating behavior by running across the water, doing the head bobbing. And also, last I heard too, is there's a lot of yellow-headed blackbirds out on the trees. So it's an exciting time actually to get on the water. So let me or Carol Anderson know if you want to come and join us. I think we are trying to say about 10 people on the lake can come, but I think we're about halfway there or more than halfway there. So let us know if you're interested in that. And also there's camp out. Every year we've gone to Lassen National Park at the Lost Creek group campsite, and we get a couple of sites, and we actually invite several Northern California chapter Audubons, and we all meet up there and camp. And you know what, with this pandemic and COVID, the best thing to do is be outside and bird and camp. So it's very safe and very healthy. So if you're interested, that's coming up June 18th through the 20th, and that will be in our next newsletter too. And there's limited space, so if you're wanting to come, you better sign up early. And I hope you've all have a chance to look at our newsletter. We have just a great white-tailed kite newsletter, and it's really bumped up in the photography field because we have credible board members and actually field trip participants that take incredible pictures. And just sit down and actually read it for a while and look at some of these pictures. And one of our greatest contributors to some photography is John C. has incredible photos, and Mary has really contributed a lot of photos too with her talent of taking pictures while she's out in the field. So anyway, give a good look at your newsletter and enjoy it. Let's see, anything else, Mary? I can't think of anything else.
Can't think of anything. Someone just told me that the Facebook page link doesn't work, so I might try and work on that.
There's always something in the tech world, isn't there? So anyway, well, let's get to our incredible program tonight. We're very fortunate to have a very talented couple in our community. It's Carol Burr and Roger Leonard. They're multi-talented, and they have done so much for our community and actually for the world for birds. And tonight, it's the art of the bird. And what we're going to do is hear from Carol and Roger since the 17th century, how advances in ornithology have changed the way artists have depicted birds. So Carol will also spend a lot of time, sometime in her studio, talking about how she has illustrated many of the birds in their books that they have authored together. So let's enjoy hearing from Carol and Roger, and take it over.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for the kind words. We appreciate it. When you asked us to do something on art and Carol's art and the books we've done, I thought it was just an appropriate thing because I just finished this book, The Art of the Bird. Now, I don't know anything about art before I did this. I mean, no ornithology, but so I had to do a lot of background on it, but I found it fascinating that ornithology and art sort of helped each other through the years. So I'm going to give a quick presentation of the history of arts in ornithology since about the 17th century. Just some really brief looks at what I did in the book. If I can get this thing going here and know what's going on.
I don't know.
Assuming everything works. There we go. Now, people have been looking at birds and depicting birds like in Egyptian hieroglyphics for thousands of years. I mean, birds have always been around, and art has always been around. It's one of the first places we see it. Now, not much has been known about birds until, you know, people, they drew them and knew a little bit about them, but nobody did anything about it scientifically until Aristotle. He named 123 species and named them mostly by habitat and by their behavior. But one of the things he did was he said he saw swallows in Greece during the summer, and of course the swallows would be flying over water as they do the tree swallows and cliff swallows, and picking up insects, and then they would disappear. Of course, they would go south to Africa to winter, but he thought they disappeared by diving into the mud. And for years, actually, until the 1800s, people thought that swallows actually dove into the mud for the winter and then came out in the springtime. And here you see a picture of fishermen actually dredging up birds along with the fish. So these tales went on for a long time. But it wasn't until about 1,000 years later when the first ornithology book came about. This is the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II of Hohenstaufen in his De Arte Venadi, or The Art of Falconry. And you can see a well-illustrated book. But then again, nothing much happened in ornithology for another couple hundred years until Conrad Gessner did his Historia Animalium. And it was illustrated by woodcuts. And what they did at that time was to take a piece of wood and simply cut out, you know, the shapes of the birds, and then print them out with ink or some sort of dye, and then color them in by hand. And the wood carving, from soft wood to the hardwood to end wood, various kinds of carvings like that, went on for a long time. But everything was printed. But the word cuts they did weren't very accurate. As you can see, this grebe here, not exactly an accurate representation. And then a Frenchman, Pierre Bellon, Carol, you pronounce this. You know,
L'histoire de la nature des oiseaux.
So published in Paris. A little bit better. And here we again, woodcuts again, and black and white, but get a little bit more scientific. And then in 1522, 1605, here was 14 volumes of natural history, 3 of them which on birds. But it was mostly impressive in size and not accurate. If you look at some of these birds, some of them were just way off beam, but at least, you know, it's trying to get a real catalog of birds going here. And as far as art supplies went, until about the 1500s, egg tempera was a common medium that actually used eggs and put dyes from various kinds of natural dyes into the eggs. And then oil painting became popular later. Here's a dodo along with a couple of parrots. Now, what was happening in the 16th, 17th century is that explorers were exploring the world, and they would come back with birds. And they would come back with exotic species, really colorful. And most of the species were things like big birds, ostriches and emus and cassowaries and toucans and parrots and chickens and pheasants. And if you think about it, these are the kinds of birds that are fairly easy kept in captivity. They didn't come back with flycatchers and sparrows and things like that. Just because it's, you know, a 2-month voyage on a ship, the birds aren't going to last. So your artwork showed a lot of toucans and parrots and those kinds of things. And not always very accurately. I mean, here's a toucan, I guess. And for the 17th century, virtually all the leading painters of birds were Dutch or Flemish. You saw any kind of bird painting you saw was almost always came from that area of the world. Rembrandt didn't do very much. He did a couple of them. And here he is, Rembrandt. This is a Rembrandt self-portrait with a dead partridge. And then there became a big fad in the 17th century Dutch paintings of parrots, especially these gray parrots. A lot of it was always women and parrots. Women and parrots was a real big theme in painting. This one was oil on panel. That means oil on wood. And then here's the woman plucking a duck. plucking a duck, and then you see a cat and a duck there. Now, what happened here, there were some people, one artist would draw everything in this picture, would paint everything in this picture except the ducks and the cat. They would actually have animalier, I forget how you pronounce it, animaliers, but people who would do nothing but paint animals. And so they would paint the whole picture and call some animal painter in. They were sort of second-class second-class painters, the ones who did animals. Now, here's a book, if you haven't read, you really ought to read. Anybody's interested in ornithology. Willoughby and Ray did the first real scientific ornithology book. And there's a really good book written by Tim Burkett, an Englishman, a wonderful Mr. Willoughby, the first true ornithologist. It's a fascinating read. But this is probably the beginning of ornithology with Francis Willoughby and John Ray. And then it went on for much more fantastic paintings and a lot of kitchen scenes. I mean, people killed all kinds of birds and all kinds of other animals for eating. There weren't any laws at that time particularly, so they would kill everything, and you'd see all sorts of little birds. You can see here, little, whoops. Sorry about that. You can see little birds here, little songbirds and a partridge, and then a big pheasant or a big peacock on top. And often you'd see a big swan right in the middle of the table. And that's because it's a good way of balancing the art in the picture, I guess. It draws your attention right to the swan right in the middle. Lots of kinds of kitchen scenes like this. And then because of all these exotic birds and other animals coming in, you get all these menagerie, and people kept zoos. So artists would go to the zoos. That's where they find these birds. And so you'd see something like this. Here's a little scene on a balcony. And here's a cardinal, a northern cardinal, along with some parrots and cockatoos and monkeys and things like that you wouldn't see in the wild, but here they are in somebody's menagerie. And then other things like this. Again, we have birds that are fairly easily kept, a flamingo and a guinea fowl and things like that. But in a really unrealistic landscape, you just don't see real landscapes like that. But they had the birds, so they would paint them somewhere. And there weren't any museums, real organized museums in the 1700s. Instead, people had what they call cabinets of curiosities. They would have a room in their house somewhere, and they would collect, especially the well-to-do people would collect everything, turtle shells and birds and seals and all kinds of stuff. And then artists would go around and pick up these things and paint them. And then the first real natural history painter probably was Mark Cadesby, who came from England over to the North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, and start painting things. And he start to put fairly realistic birds into fairly realistic backgrounds. Not real good, but the first attempt at it. So here was this flamingo with a tree in the background. You don't often see a flamingo with a tree. And things like this. Here's a goatsucker catching an insect, but he's on the ground, and you don't see these things like whippoorwills and nighthawks. You don't see them catching insects on the ground. And again, now we've moved to copper etching. Instead of woodcuts, they would etch copper and then print those out and hand color them. And you had illustrations not by Carl van Linné, who invented the taxonomic system that we know now, the binomial system, but he had a lot of people doing his illustrations. You know, this is not one of the illustrated checklist of birds of the world, but it was because of him who started this tree of life of birds. And Alexander Wilson, who's known as the father of American ornithology, he sketched the birds and he hired engravers and painters to produce the illustrations. And what they did in those days, in the 1700s and early 1800s, they sold subscriptions to their artwork. They would say, okay, here's my first painting, and if you want more, you have to subscribe to it, just like we subscribe to magazines or whatever. And one of his first subscriptions went to Thomas Jefferson. And he actually tried to sell a subscription to Audubon, who at the time was running a department store, a small department store in Louisiana. And Alexander Wilson came by and said, "You want to subscribe?" And he said no. And Audubon's brother told Audubon that, hey, you can paint better than that. And he eventually did. But we know Wilson because he's had birds named after him: Wilson, storm petrel, plover, phalarope, snipe, and warbler. And then copper engraving still went on with Audubon. Audubon do these big copper engravings, and he'd have many people at one point painting his artwork from the copper engraving. But one of the things that's been a controversy for years is that Audubon, he published his Birds of America in 4 volumes, and there's all kinds of versions of it. But here's an Audubon painting on the left and a Wilson painting on the right, and they look very much alike because Audubon was accused of plagiarizing some of Wilson's paintings, and there's a few other ones sort of like that too. And then I have to mention spectacular paintings by Elizabeth Gould and John Gould, the English people who did Birds of Europe, Birds of the Himalayas, Birds of Australia in the mid-1800s. And they did lithography. They took lithographs, and they just basically crayon on wood and then printed these birds out. And John Gould was apparently a big jerk. He was a good artist, and he shot a lot of birds, especially in Australia. But the worst part is that he didn't give his wife credit. She was apparently a better painter and did more than he did, but he took most of the credit for it. And then, through all this, people are watching birds now and trying to make them more realistic. And then binoculars started to come out in the 1700s, the really good ones in the late 1800s. First ones were opera glasses. And so the first field guide was probably Birds Through a Looking Glass. And then later, Handbook of the Birds of the Western United States. But neither one of them were very good, especially his Handbook of Birds. At 500 pages and 600 woodcuts, you would want to carry around the field. And then, of course, the first real bird guide that we know about, Roger Torrey Peterson, he used gouache, pen and ink, watercolor and oil to make the standard bird guide that we know of today, pointing out the field marks and things like that. And I can't give a talk in Chico about art without mentioning Janet Turner, and you know all about her from Chico's days. She did a lot of stuff on lino cuts and screen printing. And then, of course, the latest artist on the book you used is by David Allen Sibley. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carol.
So I wanted to just go back to Audubon, just because I think what's interesting here is that this is fairly typical of one of his paintings. And he is the one who's credited, I think, with kind of making people interested in birds, sort of as both artistic and also as just for themselves. But his process was kill the birds and then bring them home and wire them up. And that's why some of the poses that you see them in are not particularly realistic. I mean, you can tell that this was actually a dead bird that he had arranged. He also did whatever he could to make them exciting, because he was really trying to make a living with this. So the science was a little less important with him than the saleability, and that's probably why he outdid Wilson. I looked at a couple of people who are doing a lot of bird drawing, and all of them, the ones that I found, like John Muir Laws, are people who are ornithologists or are avid bird lovers and bird preservationists. And John Muir Laws has got all kinds of interesting websites. I think he'd be a great one to go to just sort of get an idea of how to draw a bird. And what he's done is he has collaborated with photographers, bird photographers, to make these wonderful, clear photographs of birds, really high intensity, up close, so that when you go to draw them, you can see the details, and that really helps a lot when you're doing the drawing. So he's got all kinds of things. If you want to take a closer look on the ones I'm showing you, just go to their websites. John Muir Laws is very, very popular. Here's another one, Alex Warnock, who does these beautiful drawings, and they are somewhat interpretive, but there is an effort to draw the bird as sort of scientifically accurate as possible. And she is another one who grew up with the birds and has an art degree. So she's coming at it more from an artistic perspective, but she also has become birds. And of course, Roger mentioned Mr. Sibley. I would say if you, he would probably be your best bet for just learning how to draw birds. And he just breaks it right down to how to look at each part of the bird, look at the feathers, look at the feet, the positioning of the tail, high, medium, or low, that sort of thing. So an example of what he does. He says he has clearly mastered the bone structure, which you see those little light bones. Then he starts with the tail and the way it sits, and then the wings coming across. And then he'll do the detail on the coloring. So I did not start with the skeleton, but you can see that knowing the head and the relationship of the head to the body, to the tail, then all those feathers, because, you know, mostly what we see, 99% of what we see are feathers. So this is, here's another one where he really shows it again, how he breaks it down. So these different feathers, the feathers over the eye, the feathers on the shoulder, the feathers under the bill, each here. And again, he shows the feet as they perch, which I think is a good way to draw a bird, because it gives you the feet as they're active. So here again, this is the kind of thing that they offer at these websites. I think it could be good fun if you ever feel like trying to be a little bit of an artist. And this is the foundation lines. And now what I used for this was photographs and a ruler, because I wanted to see the size of the head in relationship to the body, and the body to the tail, and the tail and the wings. So what you want to do is get the angles right. You want to have the angle of the body in relationship to the head. You want to know, again, whether the tail is upright or dropped, long or short. And then the location of the feet under the body, they tend to sit fairly far back, and they have a fairly wide spread for perching purposes. So this kind of thing can be helpful too. And especially if you've got a particular bird in mind. This is my studio. And as you can see, I'm spoiled rotten. This is a lovely space that we added onto the house so that when I wouldn't have my artwork scattered all over the sofa and the kitchen table. What you can see here is the easel that I got a great buy at Ellis. I recommend Ellis. It's a wonderful art store downtown, and they could use your business. And I spent a fair amount of time down there, but this easel is hugely helpful. The paper I used is 98 weight. You need a heavy paper if you're going to be using watercolor, especially, or even the watercolor pens. So what you're seeing here are watercolor pens and different.
What are these?
These are all of these up here on the top are watercolors. Yep, all of those are. But what I found is these watercolors in large containers have more paint, more pigment. And I found that better. It's easier to try to dilute than to get a strong color when you need it if you don't have that. So I kept trying different things. And I used everything I could come up with. The pens were very helpful when you had to do something that was very small. So here I am sort of looking like I'm doing what I'm doing. This is that booklet that you see there on the left is where I pulled the paper out of to do this. I always started with, yes, and this is called Canton Mixed Media, and it has 60 sheets in it. I went through, I don't know, 10 of them, 98 pounds so that you have enough weight. It's a multimedia paper, but it really works well because I used water and I used, I don't know, pens and everything I could come up with. And here's another view. Okay, this is an example of what you're seeing over here, partly hidden, is a laptop. The laptop had a picture. I'm using as an example a red, oh gosh,
Red-winged
thank you, a red-winged blackbird, just to show you how it works. So I'm working from the photograph here, and I'm trying to get with a pencil as an accurate an outline as possible. So because if you don't have that, everything after that, you've got to, the bird has to be able to fly, which is pretty important. So here I am, I'm still leaning heavily on the photograph.
And notice her little
Okay.
refreshment here.
Yeah, you can tell from my face that I probably shouldn't have any more. Okay, so I'm working along. I'm trying to decide what kind of a perch he'd be on. Now I'm beginning to use these pens. And I'm trying to remember what the brand was, but these are wonderful. You can get them in very fine point and then gradations up to 5. And so depending on which part of the bird I was working with, I would use different pens. And this watercolor mess that you see over here on the left is one that I've had for like 20 years. It turned out to be very helpful. And those are my brushes sort of down there on the right. Okay, so I'm working here. I want to get as much detail as possible because I wanted these birds to be both anatomically correct and also so three-dimensional that they could fly off the page, which means it was a little different than doing a bird guide. I was really trying to do an individual bird with as much clarity as possible. Here I am. I'm beginning to work a little bit with color. And yeah, and yes, and all the way through here, while I'm working, I'm thinking about, and you know, when you see a bird, they have lots of personality. The way they move, the way their eyes, I think, are especially critical to their having personality. So and the way they perch also shows personality, and the way they carry their tails. So I spent a lot of time on the eyes and also on the feet, because I felt those were two places where you could see that liveliness in the bird. And Roger's and our books are intended, both the trees, although, you know, personality of trees is a little different, but and now the latest book, our Wildflower book, we're trying to make these living things become so much alive to you that you have to care for them and take care of them. So this is what I thought would be helpful here. Is on the left is Sibley's drawing, and on the right is mine. And I think you can see that the Sibley is more generalized, that he was doing, you know, he did the male in the way, he did the female, he did the immature, he did the winter plumage and mating plumage, and I did one male in mating plumage. So I think that explains the difference between the two. And if you look at the eyes, I feel as though my bird looks a little more awake. So here it is in the book. You know, this one, I think we first came out with this in what, 2008 or 9, 10 maybe.
10,
yeah, 2010. What's nice about it, of course, is that it's in our park, and if the bird is in the book, it's in the park, or at least has been. Although you know, we are finding that climate change is having an effect on what we see in the park. So we did, in our enlarged or enhanced version, we added some birds like the phainopepla, and some of the other birds that had not been there but are beginning to show up. So I'm done.
Yeah, we did the book, and we've, you know, added 5 birds that you don't see very often anymore. Phainopepla, although I did see 6 phainopepla in the park when I gave somebody a bird walk about 2 years ago. There were 6 of them in one tree, 3 pairs. But we added a couple, I think a great egret I put in, things like that, and a downy woodpecker. But of all the times we've been through the park with so many groups of people, we've seen very, very few birds, maybe a handful that we haven't seen in the book. So almost all the time when people go with us to see a bird, it's in our book. Now, we went after the birds, and Carol she spent a lot of time sitting on the couch originally because we didn't have that art room, drawing pictures of birds. And it was a real stretch at first, but there were several birds I made her do over. But after a while, she got the hang of it and spent a lot of time on each of the birds. But we didn't realize, and that it was a project and took a lot of skill. But when we did the trees, trees seemed a little harder. That's harder for me finding interesting information. Birds is all kinds of interesting information. Trees, not nearly as much. Then it was harder to draw trees to make them interesting. But then we did flowers. We're just finishing up our Wildflowers of Bidwell Park book. And boy, that was a real challenge because one, there are like 800 flowering plants that we had to choose from at Bidwell Park. And the flowers come in all sorts of versions, and they go 2 or 3 years before they get to be flowering. And then you have buds and you have vegetative forms and you have all kinds of other things. So I have a lot more respect for botanists now after seeing all this kind of stuff, but hopefully that'll be an interesting book for people too. But so I think we're probably also done. But I mean, the 3 most interesting things that people look at when they go outside are birds, trees, and wildflowers, and we've covered those. And I don't think we're going to do rocks anytime soon. But who knows? There might be something else up. So we'll open it up here if anybody wants to say
questions.
hello.
Christian,
Oh, hi. I see a lot of people now. I didn't know we were there before.
Roger and Carol, thank you so much for giving us history and a lesson on how to draw birds. Actually, in September, our next program will be in September. I'm thinking that we should all be outside and Carol give us lessons on how to draw birds,
Oh, lucky you.
Set up our own easels and we'll all sit around it.
Yeah,
everybody bring your own easel.
Well, one of the things they all say is, you just can't, you have to just keep going, because it does get better. I mean, my initial birds, I think my biggest problem was I didn't have the birds in proportion, the head to the body to the tail and that sort of thing. But I just think there's so much fun. And, the watercolors are fun. They are. They're a little bit intimidating, but they're a lot of fun.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
So we'll open up for questions, and we also have the chat if you want to see what comments or questions on chat. But
Okay.
If somebody wants to go ahead and talk about a question,
Okay.
you can unmute everyone if you'd like. So we have lots of comments, some questions.
I'm going to make a comment. Carol, I love your work.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
work. And I love your studio too.
Oh, listen, I'll tell you what, I mean, I wasn't even willing to call it an art studio until I did 3 trees because I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to.
I could see it's got you all over it. Yeah, I'll have to say that I did a class with my Ollie sketching class about birds last semester, and I introduced it by showing them paintings from the junior duck stamp contest that
That is amazing what those kids
oh
can do.
my God, you want to see birds you will fall in love with.
Absolutely. Well, and I still think, I think the only reason I even got back into doing any kind of drawing as an old retired person is because my granddaughter really liked to draw. And I thought, this is something we can do together. I think it's a gift that you could, take your little person out and get a little sketchbook and then say, okay, we're going to, sit here and watch the birds go by and try to draw them. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Because all of the people that are doing this really good work now, they all grew up with it. So, get them early. I say, and I also think, this idea of the canary in the mine. I think anybody who loves birds is going to be more aware of climate change and of the importance of taking care of our nest, of not fouling our own nest or something, to use a bird metaphor. So,
yeah, great. Anyone else have a comment or a question? Yeah, I mean, Carol, what you just mentioned about, bringing a young person out to the field. I mean, again, I always think of all these great program ideas. I think the next program could be bring a youth with you, and
Great idea.
and you can just help us all draw birds.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. We'll all have a little pad and we'll put that, do the body and the head and the tail and the feet. Yep. Yeah.
That's great.
I think actually I find that bird feet are very, very interesting because you can imagine how strong they have to be and how they have to really be able to hang on in a high wind or whatever. And their feet are fascinating, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to look over at the chat column.
Okay. Oh, the pen. Yeah, I wish I had brought one up. They're
It's not a Sharpie pen in there, Carol.
There was a Sharpie, but that turned out, the problem with the Sharpie is that it's so heavy, the black Sharpies, that it actually goes through the paper. So what I ended up doing there with that red-winged blackbird was actually using watercolor on just a very, very heavy application. But I could, because the other thing I was going to say about birds is that, and you'll know this is that if you put all the shading, you say a bird is black, but if you've ever looked at like a starling, you get them in the right color, in the right light, and they're very richly colored. And I think if you think about your colors, I always thought when I finally got to the colors, that was when I just really got happy, because I could do all those subtleties that you do with color. So, and I think your little person would find the color the best part too. You just have to get a good outline, and then the actual shape of the wings and all the markings on the wings and that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could remember the name of those pens though. Yeah. Asia?
Any other comments, questions?
I saw somebody's hand.
Well, okay.
Andy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Okay, I see that Mary and I both mentioned National Audubon has had a children's art section during the winter, and she said it was John Muir Laws. I thought it was Sibley. It doesn't matter. Carol, I'm not from Chico. I don't know your work personally. I love what little I've seen. I'm just saying that those little lessons for children helped me to draw a bird almost immediately, because it is what you said about the head versus the body, and where the feet and the angle, and anyway, they led you through it. And I was so amazed at what I did as a non-artist. I just throw that out. And as far as the children and Jennifer's idea, when we had the Grebe Festival at Lake Almanor, we had a little class once, a little outing that was called journaling. I guess journaling is a more common thing now. And so the youngsters, we gave them a pad of paper, like you said, and a pens. And when you sit right there and draw anything, never mind a bird, you really see it.
Wow, that's terrific. Someone was asking about one of the more difficult birds to draw, and I would say those ones that I did some in flight, especially the raptors and the turkey vultures, and some of those, and those took a lot of time. Because with the feathers spread out like that, then each feather had to be done. And the, gosh, what am I trying to think of there? The horned owl. I mean, some of those ones where if you look at those feathers, and if the detail, I mean, nature is so patient. It does so much incredible detail. And so those took me a long time. But as I said, when I got to the color, I was in bliss. So it didn't matter. It was just trying to get the bird looking like it was a real bird. That was I guess my problem with Audubon is I thought he felt he needed to tart these birds up and to make them interesting to somebody. And I just think when you get to the point where you realize they don't need any help to be lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Yes.
I would suggest there's a lot of different kinds of art, and children could be engaged with drawing birds and not focusing on realism at all. Like
I agree with that. I agree with that. Yep.
colors and qualities and I don't know.
I agree. Well, I think what you always want to do is both with yourself and with others is not be judgmental. I mean, just, it's for love. You do it for love, and you do it because they're beautiful and you care about them. And all kinds of good things happen. I think if you stay with it, though, I definitely got better. I mean, since I was nowhere when I started, and trial and error is allowed. I just think if you do trial and error, it might take you longer to come up with something you think, oh yeah, I really like this. So I don't know. Yeah. So the Art of the Bird, if you've seen it, it's a big art book. It's like a coffee table book. But the paintings themselves are quite stunning. Yeah. But I was a little concerned about all those dead birds in the kitchen. And I figured they put the swan in the middle just because they needed white to separate all the other colors from the.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's interesting when you realize that I think for a long time it wasn't the bird that was really the purpose, if you know what I mean. It wasn't it wasn't the heart of it. Yeah. So any other questions? Let me see. Good. Sakura Pigma Micron. Oh, thank you. Joyce, is that from you? Sakura Pigma Micron is a good set of pens to use with watercolor. Okay. Good. Yeah, I do think if just to go down and go to Ellis if it's open again. I don't even know whether it is.
Yes.
Is it open again? Yeah, they have at least the gal that I was working with in there was very helpful. So yeah.
Well,
Good.
great. Anyone else? I mean, what an evening to sit around and hear Roger and Carol talk about history and illustrating birds and Carol's insight. And we get to see her studio with her little glass of wine sitting to the edge.
Yeah, well, I must say, being retired has made the pandemic. I mean, it was a good pandemic project to be drawing flowers. That and a glass of wine improved my attitude significantly.
And it was an excellent wildflower year. We didn't have much rain, but my goodness, Table Mountain, Upper Park.
I was amazed. Some of these areas, just solid color. I mean. Yeah. And they come out in these sort of, you can almost tell. I mean, you have the bright and tights, and then the tidy tips, and then the Johnny Tuck, and they sort of come along in these groups. It was quite spectacular. Yeah.
Anyway. Well, thank you for a very enjoyable evening.
Thank you. Roger says thank you too. I don't know. Maybe he's saving the world on the phone right now.
Okay. All right. We'll see you in September at a program for illustrating birds. There you go.
Oh, okay. Whatever you say.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Enjoy your summer. We won't have a program until September.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Good seeing you all.
Thanks, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for having
you.
the program.
Good ideas.
Beautiful birds.
Night.
Good night.